So this is an area that I've been monitoring for years because this is really a uniquely suitable habitat for really reclusive and shy animals like bobcats and a mountain lion that happens to live here. And so I looked at an aerial view of this park and I identified these little canyons, drainages, intersections, and trails where you're likely to get a lot of wildlife traffic. And yes, of course, almost all of the park, the 53 miles of trails in Griffith Park, include hikers as well. But some are less busy than others. And so I grew up in this area, so I know that a lot of these trails pretty well, including this one. And so I gave it a shot, knowing that it has a lot of dense cover. It's on the edge of the park. And if you're a territorial carnivore like a bobcat or a mountain lion, you're regularly patrolling that territory, which means that you're going along the edge of the park. And if there's areas along the edge that have a lot of tree cover, canopy cover, you're likely to get a lot of activity there if you're someone who's trying to photograph or look for tracks and sign of these carnivores that are nocturnal and usually out when we're sleeping at night. So I'm gonna put a camera trap. The last one I had out here was outdated, so I had to replace it. And so yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. So it's a motion activated camera, if you're not familiar with the technology. And this one in particular actually sends text messages or emails to me when I get photos or notifications on the app. And so I can actually check what's going on at this site from the comfort of my own home. And it's kind of a weird routine I have, and my wife's even used to it now. Like I wake up in the morning, like most people check like whatever Facebook or whatever, yeah. And I'm like checking my camera trap app, and like I was like, oh, I got a photo of P22, or look at this cool gray fox photo or whatever. She's like, oh yeah, whatever, Miguel.
She's over it.
So it's really great how technology has kind of made this type of work more accessible, more convenient, and reduce the barriers for people to kind of interact with this. Even nerdy scientists like me appreciate that convenience as well. So it's triggered by motion or heat. And so we put it at a level that will hit an animal with the beam along the torso area, so you kind of adjust the height based on the height of the target species that you're looking for. So if we're looking at going for opossums or skunks, we'd have the camera pretty low, so that we could get its torso, which is a little bit lower. But if we were going after coyotes or a mountain lion and we had it this low, we'd have a lot of missed opportunities, because we maybe hit the legs if we're lucky, if it steps across the beam, but it wouldn't hit its body, its flank of its body. And so there's more opportunities to miss those animals. So since we're looking for those bigger animals, which include coyotes, bobcats, and maybe P22, we raise it a little bit higher. And so that's how kind of it's been positioned for all these years, and it's been very successful. I've gotten P22 regularly, and especially when he was younger, he would probably come here once every 2 weeks at minimum, and walk in both directions. This is a nice intersection of trails. There's like a big intersection of about 4 trails here, and especially at night, we see him kind of just sharing this space with all these people, and we're right up against a residential area here, which is astonishing, especially as someone who grew up in this neighborhood and knows like how people just use this on a regular basis just to walk their dogs, because it's such a convenient little trail. And so people are out here all the time, either they're for a weekend hike for somebody that's living further away, but also the local residents use this trail really regularly, even in the evening, because my dog has to pee at night, I have to let it out, and this is just a really convenient trail. And even with all that activity, this mountain lion has learned to coexist, which is great. And he's been coexisting for the past 10 years with thousands of people using this park. This park is one of the most famous parks in the world, I would say, and one of the busiest urban parks, and also one of the largest urban parks. And it's bigger than Central Park, to kind of give you a sense of how big it is. 53 miles of trails, and it has all these different uses. So you can come here to go to on pony rides, you can come and take a ride on miniature trains, you can come and go to a concert at the Greek Theater, you can go golfing at 2 18-hole golf courses that are within the park. Yes, 2 18-hole golf courses, and there's a zoo in the park, and a merry-go-round, picnic areas with barbecues, play structures like your neighborhood pocket park, but also within that there's an urban wilderness, and the urban wilderness has 53 miles of trails, some of which are there's a few canyons that are a little bit harder to access or less popular, and those, as you can imagine, are the ones where there's more wildlife, especially of sensitive species or shy species, and so it's just amazing that to have this resource, to have this oasis, but at the same time, it's something that a lot of people a lot of people are protective of, because this park is so unique, such a huge resource. So when there is ever a threat to developing some of this wilderness, knowing how much is already gone, not just from this park, but from LA in general, people often are standing up for this park, which is really great to see, and are questioning any changes in use in this park, especially of the hiking areas and open space, even if there's not a trail on it, because we know it's not. More and more people are now recognizing that this isn't just a park for people, tourists, and local hikers. It's also an important oasis for local wildlife. And as we continue to introduce everybody of all backgrounds to the wonderful biodiversity that's here, more people are finding their own connection to this park. And P22's story, which is a very relatable story, is one of those narratives that has been so far-reaching across cultural boundaries and geographic boundaries, and has really connected to a really diverse audience. And I can go into that story more, but I'm gonna finish.
Let's see the
connecting the camera, and I'll share a little bit more about his story, which is pretty exciting and inspirational.
So you've got a cable.
Yeah, so I have the little hole in the back that allows me to put this cable lock, this python, we call it a python lock, that allows us to basically secure it to the tree, but also lock it to the tree. So it keeps it steady. And then I usually kind of prop it up so that, because you don't want it pointing down, it's only going to get the ground, so that we put like a rock or some bark behind it so that it's pointing straight, and that's kind of how it works. And we just let it run. I usually check them about, if I had to check them in person, I check them about once every 2 weeks or so. When I first set up a camera, I do it probably more often, like once a week, and just to see if everything's working okay. And once I know it's working okay, I just check it once every 2 weeks. And these batteries last a very, very long time.
Nice.
Which is very convenient.
How long do they last?
Some of the cameras, I've seen them last like a year.
Wow, nice.
Yeah, especially if they're like really efficient cameras that use lithium batteries. It allows them to last. And so what I'm doing now is I'm looking at my ideal spot to target animals where there's a big intersection in these trails, and also pointing it in a way where I'm not going to be totally perpendicular to the trail. I'm going to point it in a way where it's shooting down the trail at least a little bit, so that if an animal is running fast, I'm not just going to catch it as the tail passes or something like that. So I'll be able to, the camera will be able to sense it as it's coming towards it and get at least a couple photos of it.
See if I can get what angle the camera is kind of getting right there. That's kind of what the camera sees.
Yeah.
That's right there. There we go.
So I do this, I mean, it's really amazing work that I've been able to I did as one of the first jobs when I started in my career was doing camera trap research. When I started doing camera trap research, around 2005, they were film cameras. And so we would literally have to go and take the camera rolls to a photo development center and be like anxiously waiting what we see. And then
in 2005?
2005, that was like right when it was about to turn towards digital.
Wow.
And then like the newer digital ones are super expensive and not totally reliable yet.
Yeah.
But anyways, soon after that, they became pretty digital throughout the field. But anyway, and now like there's all types of technology. They can send you photos to your phone now. They can take HD video. You can take photos and video. All types of really cool little accessories and features that weren't available not too long ago, which is pretty cool.
That is very cool.
Yeah. And so I've been able to use this technology to study like really cool wildlife throughout Southern California and Orange County, helping the USGS and supporting a project that was funded by the Nature Conservancy and the Los Angeles River, looking at the LA River as this corridor and also as habitat for these wide-ranging species. I've personally put them in places like Elysian Park where the Dodgers play. I put them in Baldwin Hills, which is in West Los Angeles. And of course Griffith Park, which is was my neighborhood park as a kid. And so it's all these really great opportunities to study animals that I didn't know existed when I was a kid, and doing it in a way that provides these really engaging and eye-opening photos or videos to really obviously have clear evidence that they're there, but also in a way that's really easy to share and fun to share with people, versus like a data point or something
sure.
like that.
A video is a lot more accessible than like a spreadsheet.
Yeah. So we'll see what we get. P22 is kind of slowed down a little bit in his old age, but
how long does a mountain lion live usually?
I mean, in captivity they can live about 20 years or so, maybe a little bit more, but in the wild, this is probably about when even the most healthy animal with the most expansive territory usually either gets kicked out of his territory, gets injured or whatever. That's around 15-ish years old. But in LA, the lifespan is much, much shorter on average because of all the urban dangers that they face. Rat poison exposure, these hyper-territorial males and limited suitable habitat kind of fighting over remaining open space. And so the most vulnerable are these younger males, these dispersing males that are just trying to find their way after they're basically kicked out of their mom's kind of territory, and either have one of two choices. One is to fight the local resident male that owns that territory already, or disperse and find a territory of their own, which isn't easy as well. Isn't easy either because they have to cross freeways. And in our case, in the Santa Monica Mountains, which the National Park Service has been studying since 2002. They're just studying this really isolated population that's surrounded by freeways and on the south by the Pacific Ocean. And so it's basically an island of habitat that all these territorial males are sharing and developing this hyper territorial behavior as a result, because it's not as expansive as other places where they can be away from each other. And if you're a solitary animal, you just can't tolerate that. You can't risk having that competitor in your space, and to the point where they're killing their own offspring, they're killing females, and so it's just not a sustainable situation where they're killing individuals that are potentially going to pass on their genes or help them pass on their genes, and so it's really a scary situation for that population. And based on the research that Park Service and their partners have done, they've done models of the population and have figured out that within 50 years they will go extinct if connectivity is not improved between this population and neighboring open spaces. So that's why it's kind of a race against time, and P22 is the unlikely hero, along with the scientists that kind of brought this to attention to the world. I think it took a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds and disciplines coming together to potentially save this population.
It's fantastic.